Hello, everyone, and welcome to another special edition of Your Voice, Your Future. Have you ever thought about who takes in more refugees than any other place in the world? It would not surprise you that the United States would be at the top of the list, and Germany, and then France. But the fourth will absolutely shock you. Costa Rica is the place that takes in more refugees than any other place outside the big three. Dr. Catalina Crespo Sancho is the ambassador of Costa Rica to the United States, and we welcome her to our platform. It's really shocking. Why? I know you guys border Nicaragua and other places, and there's migrants that's crossing. Talk about what Costa Rica has learned from taking all these refugees, and what can our country learn from it as well?
So just to give you numbers so that people can understand what the, just the numbers is that 20% of our population are migrants, which is really high. It's really, really high. However, I do have to say that Costa Rica, because we decided in 1948 to abolish the Army, all that money that was initially invested in the Army went for education, went for health, social services. So what that meant was our education level became really high. So those migrants that live there, which are mostly Nicaraguans, that's one of the reasons why when you see in the news that that different nationalities are at the border between the U.S. and Mexico, you rarely hear Nicaraguans because they go to Costa Rica, and they do the jobs that Costa Ricans don't do anymore. So in a way, they've assimilated to the Costa Rican system. They help us make Costa Rica a lot better than what it is. So we've been really good at getting those migrants, specifically the refugees, to come and just be part of society
but what is the road to citizenship?
There is a whole process. Again, we advocate for organized immigration, not for illegal immigration. So Costa Rica wants organized legal migration. And I think it's something that the U.S. is also looking for. So organized legal migration, which is very different from illegal migration. In the past few years, we've also had the issues of a lot of migrants passing through Costa Rica, coming through to the United States, going through Panama, Costa Rica, and the rest until they come here. The numbers were really high, and that's been a problem not only for the U.S., but all the countries in the middle, that we have to deal with high numbers of people crossing our borders and just coming in illegally and then moving around. Some, they stay quite a bit. Then they might stay a week or two or even a month, and then usually they keep on going.
Well, your police is not trained like the military. They're trained differently to deal with this influx of migrants coming into your country. Again,
Costa Rica does, that we do not have a military does not mean that we don't have a police.
But they're trained differently.
It's just a civil police, which is the police that you get here in D.C. or in any states. It's civilian police. It's very different than military training. However, we do have a police, we have a border police, and then they have to deal with the same issues that border police here in the U.S. do.
So you read the stories here in the United States about the narrative about illegals and migrants killing, raping, pillaging. They're getting $1,000, they come in, they get a cell phone, they get housing, they get 3 meals a day. How does that compare to how it works in Costa Rica?
Okay, so I can speak about the Costa Rican system itself.
Yes.
I cannot speak about the U.S.
Well, I'm talking about we understand the U.S.
Yes,
system. Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
So in Costa Rica, again, there is a legal pathway to citizenship. There is a legal pathway if you want to apply for refugee status. There's all these legal pathways. If you are an illegal, then again, you cannot have access to many of the things that legal and also Costa Ricans do.
So you just said in that comment that illegals do work their way in.
They do.
Mm-hmm.
But they do work their way in everywhere in the world. It's just that the system...
But if you find them, will you deport them?
Actually, if you find them, then they cannot be there legally. So there's different ways of... Some are deported, some...
How is this determined?
Well, they have to give the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to show your ID, where are you coming from? Do you have your, we have a little card that says like you're a resident or you're a refugee, depends on your status. So there are clear laws to see if you are here or not here, in Costa Rica illegally, then you can't be.
What about the issue of crime?
In what sense?
In other words, look, when you're bringing in migrants, whether legal or not, you got narcotics, drug trafficking. There's a whole different economy that comes in with that requires the attention of law enforcement and social services.
Mm-hmm.
How does that impact your economy? How does it impact your crime and your way of life?
It impacts quite a bit. So I'll give you an example. So for example, if you're underage, a minor, under the age of 18, by Costa Rican law, you have to give them all the health system because Costa Rica takes care of minors quite a bit. So there is a law that says even if you're illegal, you have to take care of underage kids. If you're an adult after 18, you don't have to go to the health system. So that's one. The other issue is education. So there is quite a bit of pressure from the people that are crossing that they have to take, social services. The police also have to police the migrants that are crossing our country. Not only our country, but the entire Central American region, which the numbers are so high that then it becomes a burden to the system, to the government, to the governmental system. So it can become a serious burden.
How do you address birthright citizens?
If you're born in Costa Rica, immediately you are a Costa Rican citizen.
Doesn't matter whether you're a legal migrant, it doesn't matter.
If the child is born in Costa Rican territory, it is a Costa Rican citizen.
Let's go back to, you have a high proficiency in education. Now, you may say you don't have a military and you take that money and you put it in those resources, but we spend billions of dollars on education in our country, and it really makes not much of a difference in the classroom. The illiteracy, the reading, math, science proficiency is very disappointing. How do you use those resources to be at the top of the ladder when it comes to educating your citizens?
And also at the top of the ladder of health systems.
Health system.
We're one of the top 10
one of the top 10 in the world.
In the world.
Yes.
So that actually says quite a bit. And
but it answers the same question.
Yes.
Yes.
It answers the same question.
Yes.
So basically, what we're doing is we said, okay, all that chunk of money, how are we going to move it into literacy? So, for example, our literacy rate, I don't know the U.S., but you could be able to tell us what the literacy rate in the United States is. But Costa Rica is over 95% of literacy.
Amazing.
So that is pretty high for, this country that
What's your population?
About 5.2 million people.
Oh.
And out of that 5.2 million, 1 million are migrants.
1 million.
So again, we're talking about 20%, which is really high.
So tell us, what is it that you do in the classroom that's quite different than the rest of the world?
What can I say? We do invest quite a bit in education, but also in the social services.
What about the standards? What about the standards? What about the teachers? What about what you're teaching in the classroom? What is it about the expectations you have for the teachers and the kids in that classroom?
Well, it's the public system. So the public system has several tiers. So it has the regular schools, the academic schools, but it has also the scientific schools, which we decided that that was a good way of going. So a lot of the kids that are graduating from scientific schools, which now my president decided to increase those schools, ideally, is that they can become the future engineers. And that's why Costa Rica is one of the few countries that did that transition from agro to nowadays our #1 commercial item is that one that we export the most is medical devices. People still think that we export pineapples and coffee. We do, but our #1 is medical devices. So how did we do that? Again, investing in education, you know, working with the teachers, doing standards, standards for teachers, but standards for students. Investing in a good health system where everybody has access to. That is really important.
But the healthcare actually work for the patient. You don't have insurance companies refusing to pay for these claims. It works. How? And let me just say this.
Yes.
Let me just say this.
It's not for free. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah, but people don't mind paying for it.
Yes.
They don't. They don't mind. I'm about to go to break. I really need our audience to understand this. When I mentioned in the beginning about Germany, France, and the United States, and Costa Rica taking in refugees, what that tells you is that these refugees want to go to a country that is an economic might, where there's prosperity, where there's less crime, where there's a strong educational system, where there's a strong healthcare system, where there's a system, there's an infrastructure in place. And Costa Rica, in terms of its phenomenal economic success, can be compared with the United States. It's where people want to go. We're going to get into that more with the ambassador from Costa Rica to the United States when we return after these messages. I'm Armstrong Williams. Ambassador Catalina, Crespo, Sancho, welcome back to the broadcast. Let me give you a chance to answer those questions as we were going out to break.
When people ask, how did Costa Rica make it? What did they do? Why is it that, you know, we changed from an agro kind of more poor country to a middle income and a country that now our #1 export is medical devices? What I tell them and what my president tells them, it is a whole, you know, just a whole group of things.
It's an investment.
It's an investment on education. It's an investment on health, on social services, on environmental policies, on peace policies. It's like a whole culture. It's not one thing. It's many years of people and politicians and the country and the community saying, okay, we want a better Costa Rica. How do we do it? And it's a whole combination of all of those together.
What about, you know, Costa Rica has long been a leader in human rights. That was your arena before becoming ambassador to Costa Rica. And listen, you're not a politician. This is your first diplomatic post, which says a lot about you and the respect that you have in your country. But
it says a lot about the president, too, that he chose somebody, a human rights specialist, to become the ambassador of the U.S.
Yeah, you know, and you're a strong advocate of environmental sustainability.
Yes, the country is.
Yes.
Correct.
And you understand something also about climate change, because you're impacted by the floods.
Yes.
And the things that you experience in your country. What can we learn from you when you look at the fires in California, when you look at the natural disasters in North Carolina and Florida and other places? What can we learn?
Well, again, Costa Rica also has those,
same.
you know, during hurricane season,
Yeah.
our parts of our territory gets flooded and lives are lost, just like in California right now. So these are very tragic events.
Do you attribute it to climate change? It's so much more than that.
It is so much more than that.
Thank you.
However,
Let's
that
talk
is-
about both. Let's talk about both.
Environment
Okay.
is an important part of how and why the world is going to where
I
it
get
is.
that, but educate us on it's so much more than that. Because this is what you live in your country.
Yes. So one thing is the climate change, how the world is changing, how the environment is changing in different. So we're getting a lot more rain that we didn't have before. Usually the hurricanes would go further north to, you know, kind of Mexico and Florida and the Caribbean. Now, because of the weather patterns, they're changing. So they're coming down to south. So Costa Rica, Panama are being more impacted than we used to. And the trends is that we're going to be even more impacted than before. So that's already a big problem. But the issue of energy, for example, Costa Rica said, okay, we're having an energy issue. What do we do? And in the 70s, Costa Rica said, okay, what are we going to do? What we decided was, let's do the renewable sources. So Costa Rica is one of the few countries, if not the only one in the world, that about 98%, 99, 97, depending on the year, all our energy comes from renewable sources, mainly water, hydro, but we also have been we've invested in wind, a little bit in solar, and also because we have 9 volcanoes in our country, so we have a geothermal. So those are the things that countries are doing, because petroleum is one thing, but you know, it will end. There's petroleum, and there has to be a time when it's going to end. So what are we going to do next? And countries need to be prepared. Maybe not this year or 10 years or in 100 years, but it's about what are we going to do next? So Costa Rica in the 70s had the vision to say, okay, let's see what we can do, you know, for the energy sector. But also, as I mentioned before, how are we going to give a health system to keep our community and our country and our people safe and also healthy? What do we do that? How are we keeping our people healthy? How are we going to keep them educated so we can, you know, grow as a country? And went from agro, as I said before, to a more techie. And now let me give you an interesting number. So by 2050, the predictions are that 20% of all semiconductors are going to be built in Costa Rica.
Really?
Yes. And of course, most of these go to the United States because we are very close allies to the United States, which means that usually we're part of the supply chain. Intel has been there for about 28 years and many other companies. So we build some parts that come to the U.S. and the U.S. finishes them here. So we're part of that supply chain that helps for national security in the United States.
You know, it is true. We are strategic allies. I can't believe I've talked to you this long and have not mentioned the fact that we have a new administration. And this is your year 2 of your being on the job, so you had an opportunity to work with the Biden-Harris administration. But boy, this Trump-Vance administration is radically different. How does one adjust as a diplomat, as the ambassador, to make sure that you continue this strong alliance with this administration and the kinds of goals that you have in mind where you share these resources?
Well, first, historically, Costa Rica has had really good relationships with the United States, regardless if it's a Democrat or a Republican president. And also, we had very good relationships with the previous Trump or the first Trump administration. So I don't see why it should be different this time. And again, Costa Rica has always been a good partner, a strategic partner, is the longest standing democracy in the Latin American region. So that already says quite a bit of how important, you know, not only the U.S. is to Costa Rica, but Costa Rica is to the United States. And being allies actually it's good for both countries, is a win-win situation. So yes, first we congratulate the United States, and because this is how the democratic process works. People go elect your presidents, and then there's that peaceful transfer of power, which we saw on Monday the 20th, that's an example of how it should be. So again, I see it going really well. We're going to have the visit of the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, within the first weeks of February. Good things have happened in the past. Good things are still going to be happening.
So what specific opportunities, Madam Ambassador, do you see for collaboration between Costa Rica and our countries on issues such as security, migration, or climate change?
Yes. Well, I would include there first the security issue, because the issue that's happening here with fentanyl, which is devastating, 80,000 people or more dying of overdose, and a lot of them young people, that is just not acceptable. And how cartels have been taking over the Latin American region, that is a huge problem, and Costa Rica is suffering from that too. So we've been collaborating with the United States, and I really hope that the Trump administration, we can collaborate even stronger in the topic of security related to drug trafficking. The other issue is migration. If you think about it, Panama and Costa Rica are really, you go through the Darien Gap, and there's this, Panama is small, Costa Rica is small, and the migrants have to go through there to go through the rest of the territory to get to the United States. So, and one thing that we have been collaborating is the safe mobility offices that the Biden administration kind of had set up. But we're hoping that with the Trump administration, and we're going to see how the visit of Secretary Rubio, how that turns out. The migration needs to be a topic of very strong collaboration between not only Costa Rica, but the region and the United States. Because if the more migrants come through the United States, the ones who also suffer are countries like Costa Rica, which is a problem for us too.
As a former president of the Central American Council of Human Rights Institutions, Ambassador, what lessons from the regional migration crisis can be applied to the United States-Costa Rica relations?
Well, I think one of the first issues is that countries need to have communication of what's going on, who's going through, what issues are, for example, if Colombia is having a group or Panama is having some issues, then the rest of the territories, the rest of the countries, including the United States, should know. So that information is key. So there is already help, between Panama and Costa Rica. It's like, okay, these are the groups. We've actually, between Panama and Costa Rica, have been able to capture quite a bit of people in the terrorist lists before they come to the United States, which is key for security of all the region, but also United States. So keep that in mind, that's important. But unless all the countries are connected and communicating with who is going, what are they, who are the movements, where big groups are moving, unless we get that, that's gonna be more complicated. So that communication needs to be established.
Ambassador Catalina Crespo Sancho, I am just so impressed with your grasp of so many issues. I've been doing this since like 200 years, and you're rare, and you're not a politician. I want to give you, I know we're out of time, but it doesn't matter. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about something that we've not raised on this platform that is important to you. The
issue of peace in the world.
Peace in the world.
I think that's number one.
We never talk about peace.
We used to talk a lot about peace, but we stopped talking about it. And if you think about it, since the 1940s, end of 1940s, the world has been, kind of a peaceful sort of transition. However, in the last 20 years, that has changed significantly. And unless we talk about peace in countries like Costa Rica, which is a country that does not have an army, even with complicated neighbors, we still get along with our neighbors. We still, don't get me wrong, sometimes we kind of do a little back and forth, but we still, just think that the world should be peaceful, and we should talk to each other. We cannot have a world that's fighting, and the U.S. has always been a beacon of hope for many countries around the world. And although Costa Rica is very tiny, if you think about the message of environment, of education, of health, of how we treat our citizens, but how we also treat the ones who are not our citizens, and then how we treat the ones who come and visit our country. And people love Costa Rica because, not only because the country is beautiful, because there are many beautiful countries, but how they feel in the country, how they feel respected, how they feel that they're part of a society. So if you do go there, have that feeling of peacefulness, of how we can all be different but still live together and respect each other. That's important.
You said something, and I'm getting out of here, by the way, that of all the positions, all the jobs, all the things that you've done in your career, nothing has been more fulfilling than being a diplomat, an ambassador.
In the United States.
In the United States.
Yes. I've done fantastic jobs.
Yes.
I worked on war prevention in Southeast Asia and Africa and Latin, and I've done really great jobs. This has been the best one because I get to talk to people about how wonderful Costa Rica is, how wonderful the region is. And I also work with other countries to see if we can work together to present some sort of option for the US or even for the region. So I work very closely with ambassadors from the Caribbean, from Latin America, from Asia, from Africa, from Europe, all of us together in the United States.
Dr. Crespo, Sancho, it has really been an honor. You got to make me a promise that you'll come back.
I will.
Okay.
And you have to make me a promise that you will go and visit Costa Rica.
Aideen, we're going to Costa Rica. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you
sir.
so much. When we return, we're going to talk about Alzheimer's and why it has all of a sudden changed and what you can do with preventive measures and much more. Your voice, your future. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. We're joined now by Dr. Mateja Leonni, who's a PhD in Tucson, Arizona. And what she's doing is really extraordinary in the area of Alzheimer's and what has changed. Dr. Stanonik, welcome so much. Welcome to the broadcast, and thank you so much for joining us.
I am so thrilled to be here, Mr. Williams. Thank you to invite me.
You know, you're from Slovenia, home of our First Lady, Melania Trump.
Yes, I am. I'd like to actually give a big shout to President Trump and the First Lady. Congratulations. Ne morem si zamisliti boljše in lepše in bolj pametne ženske v tej vlogi in ji želim veliko uspehov v njeni stari in novi vlogi. Čestitke.
Wow. Well, listen. You know, I'm really fascinated. I want people to know that Dr. Ben Carson, who's a very dear friend, rarely, I don't know if he's ever called me to recommend someone to be on the show. And I think you're the first. He told me I had to talk to you about the fascination of what you've been able to do in the lab and what you've learned about Alzheimer's. Tell us a little about your medical background and the evolution of it first.
I'll be glad to, but first I didn't want to forget a happy upcoming birthday to you, Mr. Williams.
Oh, yes, it is. It's coming. Thank you. Dr. Carson, he's good. But I want to hear about what inspired your mission to find a cure to Alzheimer's disease when you started out at such a young age.
Correct. So I, was a teenager 30 years ago, and I ran away from home, from Slovenia, to come to this country to study neuroscience, and specifically with the goal in mind to one day be able to cure Alzheimer's disease. That's been my lifelong personal and professional mission. In this country, I went through undergraduate training, master's, PhD, postdoc, and then I went all the way back to medical school and went on to get subsequent training in neurology. So as an MD, I am a neurologist with several areas of subspecialty training in neurology, but I consider myself a clinical neuroscientist. So that's been, 30 years in the making with unbelievable opportunities in this country.
Explain why such a dramatic increase in Alzheimer's.
Well, I think it's a little bit more complicated, sir, than just to say that it's a dramatic increase just in Alzheimer's. There's many different reasons for that. People tend to live longer, right, with advancements in medical technologies and so forth. So we definitely are seeing a part of that. But Alzheimer's disease is a type of dementia. So the longer version of that is Alzheimer's type of dementia, which is in the umbrella of dementias, and we know many, many, many other dementias. Some are caused by, let's say, cardiovascular disease and diabetes. We call that vascular dementias. Some are caused by other chronic medical illnesses and so forth. And I think probably the biggest issue is that we've had an incredible, really incredibly drastic increase of all the chronic medical conditions, to pave the way and add to the pathway that finally leads to dementia, and then specifically to a dementia of Alzheimer's type.
How has the traditional treatments, doctor, changed?
Yeah, so we have had a revolutionary, a dramatic change just a few years ago. So back when I started out in my research, I worked on developing new psychological cognitive tests where we would try to determine what level of dementia or memory loss people are experiencing. And then I went on because these compounds that are now available for prescribing for Alzheimer's disease were just sort of beginning to be researched. But we've always known that Alzheimer's disease specifically is caused by these toxic proteins in the brain, beta amyloid and tau neurofibrillary tangles. So the absolutely revolutionary Developments in just the last few years were that the so-called amyloid targeted therapy, 3 agents became approved in the United States. The first one was Aduhelm a little more than 3 years ago. Second one, a little over 2 years ago, was lecanemab or Leqembi. And the most recent one is donanemab or Kisunla. I can go into a little interesting story maybe later to let you know how come that I got so involved and so much on the forefront of using these medications. But at the same time, even though this is revolutionary and has the capacity, and I've seen it in my own patient, to completely clear these abnormal proteins from the brain, it's also not the whole story. It's far from what you would call a silver bullet. But the initial findings in the community, because I never did actual clinical trials on these medications, I have many hundreds of patients who have now been treated, regular patients from the community from around the world, actually.
It would be interesting for you to talk about the testimonials, since you mentioned that, and how effective they've been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe let me just mention first that with my background as a psychologist, I've always approached memory treatment per se probably in a very different way than my other neurology colleagues. We have, good data that actually shows, you may recognize the name of Dale Bredesen, Mark Hyman, and so forth, who have shown that aggressive interventions in changing one's lifestyles can actually reverse dementia, and specifically Alzheimer's disease, if not just halting it, from further progression.
So what is it that they would need to change in their lifestyles to just halt the progression?
Yeah, so as a stroke neurologist, I am absolutely the most aggressive in identifying and very much controlling any risk for cerebrovascular disease in order to halt the onset of vascular dementia, for example. Things that we talk about in life, that are good for you. We now have good clinical trials that show the more oxygen, the more blood you pump to the brain, the later the onset of any cognitive decline. So physical activity and exercise, exceedingly important, even more so than doing Sudoku and mental exercises, for example. Being socially engaged and knowing what's going on in the world is another factor that's being discovered in the last few days. We have some published data how incredibly protective that is against memory loss. So there's many out there. Probably another very straightforward one is absolutely controlling blood sugar. So, we talk about hemoglobin A1C as yet another vital sign that we check at our primary care doctors that absolutely has to be addressed when you as a neurologist see somebody for memory loss.
I know we haven't gotten into what you've discovered in the testimonial, but I'm more curious about now what is different about what you have proposed, because I can tell you are certainly someone who's an innovator and go outside the box on this when you are doing your discoveries, when you're in the lab and you're doing your research. So I'm more curious about what you propose versus what you've seen. Okay,
so let's talk about that. So as I've said, I've used all these new amyloid targeting therapies for the last 3 or so years. I've noticed that dosing schedules and the logistics of giving these infusions could be improved. So we did that for our patients, slowing down infusions to prevent reactions, doing everything possible to prevent the 2 most notorious possible side effects, which are brain swelling and brain bleeding, right? Nobody wants that. The other innovative thing has been mostly in the area of affordability and issues with insurances. And really, when I first started with this, I'll touch upon, how lucky I was that the first drug, Aduhelm, that was actually approved in the United States was never covered by any insurance. So I had a large number of patients who who came from all over the world and cash paid. And this was, we're talking about a price of probably $250,000 per year. Plus, you have to get those infusions with Aduhelm. It was every 4 weeks. But that gave me the initial experience right after the drug was approved to get some clinical sense how this works, what are the side effects. And then when we came closer to the second drug being approved, the Leqembi, and Medicare finally saying, okay, now we're going to pay for the necessary diagnostics. Now we're going to, consider paying for this drug in appropriate patients. All that was a very much of a trickling thing. So I own Vita Medica Institute, which is a private entity. And we are small enough that quickly I foresaw that if I didn't put all these key stakeholders, the specific imaging entities, the specific labs that will do these very specialized blood work tests on these patients, and many other infusion companies who are in charge of infusing these patients, I quickly pulled together all these entities and in a very novel and innovative way. So we have been working together for the last, 3.5 years.
Dr. Mateja Leonni, just hold that point. Let me take a quick break and come back. Dr. Mateja Leonni, and we're talking about Alzheimer's. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Dr. Leonni, can we engage in the testimonials that shows the effectiveness of what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. And, the testimonials are the following. So let me speak about, first of all, what I've observed in real patients, in the community in terms of side effects. That was probably the biggest eye opener when I started using these medications. The side effects, these two horrible side effects of brain swelling and brain bleeding are reported in the clinical trials anywhere between 0.5% up to 50%. So when I looked at that initially, I thought, why in the world would I give some medicine to somebody if they have a 50% chance of bleeding in the brain? That is nowhere, not even closely, what we have observed in our populations of patients who have finished treatments or are currently still undergoing treatments with these medications. So that was a great eye opener. The other one would be, to speak a little bit about the efficacy. As I said before, these medications are far from being a silver bullet. But with my patients in the community, I address all those other issues that I touched upon initially to make sure that we are controlling and reversing all the factors that contribute to this, to the dementia. But in terms of how are these new medications looked at, we consider them disease-modifying agents. So this is not a cure per se, but they do modify the disease. What in fact happens is we disrupt the deposition of those bad toxic proteins in the brain, and these drugs basically are able to, quote unquote, melt them away and you excrete them. So in most of my patients, we have actually seen that. We have halted the progression of the disease, and that's or slowed down the progression. That's what the clinical trials did show us. But I am just absolutely flabbergasted of how many patients I have who, at the end of the 1 year or 18-month treatment, have actually had reversal of their memory loss, short-term memory loss issues. Right now, we're looking at, how does this tie into like the very sophisticated way of looking how early in the disease we started and administer these medications, and some preliminary data I can share with you. Just 1 point difference in the scores of something called an MMSE, Mini Mental Status Exam, or MOCA, the Montreal, which are the cornerstone ones that we do, and more, can make a huge difference in a patient, whether we actually just stop the progression of the disease or whether we are able to reverse the process. So this is a fascinating finding, but from the community, but at the same time, as a physician, not as such a surprising, right? Because what do we talk about in cancer detection and treatment, right? Nowadays, we have better ways for early detection of various cancers, and hence some of them have become, in fact, curable. The same thing pertains to this process, would be my first takeaway from all my realistic experience out in the real world.
What are your challenges moving forward with the medical community, with Big Pharma?
And we have many, and I just maybe want to frame this first. Dementia is absolutely the highest global health crisis of the 21st century. Not just Alzheimer's, but all the dementias combined, okay? For example, we have about 7 million here in the United States living with dementia. These are typically moderate to severe dementias, about the same in Europe, and more than 55 million live with those kind of severity of dementia around the globe. If you look at the cost to society of this, currently we spend over 1.3 trillion US in this country to take care of these patients, and that's set to increase to about 3 trillion by 2030. So this is like COVID epidemic was nothing compared to what we're dealing with here. So there are, you asked me about the challenges, right? So I do want to touch upon that. I think they come from medicine, clinically addressing this. We've got that down, and there is specific therapies coming down the pipeline, probably in 4 to 6 weeks, new agents that are going to target the elimination of tau proteins from the brain, new agents that are targeting the beta secretase, which is an enzyme that sort of makes these proteins toxic and depositing in the brain, and so forth. So literally all this stuff is at our fingertips to be available to anybody theoretically. Where the problem is the following. We are completely inept and underdiagnosing the earliest stages of Alzheimer's.
Why? Why, though? Why?
Why? Because, let me give you an example. If one of my patients who's on one of these agents happens to go to the ER because they got confused and we want to do some imaging to make sure they are not bleeding in the brain, the ER doctors, at least here in southern Arizona, tell them there is no such thing as, disease-modifying agents for Alzheimer's. What are you talking about? You're totally crazy. There's a complete shut off in the medical community. So it's got to start there, educating our peers. But much more so, I think we're going to start seeing real changes when we educate the general public. I did this years ago in the South, when I lived in the South, when I first came, I lived in Georgia and East Tennessee area, and even in South Carolina. So for my PhD, I stopped for 5 years every weekend in all the Black churches in the area to raise the awareness, kind of partnering with the preachers, and we raised a lot of awareness on these issues. And
what is it they need to be aware of?
So the fact that Alzheimer's dementia is curable if you detect it early. So paying attention. So, when somebody's, I don't know, 60, 65, 70, and they go to another room and they forget what they came there to get, or what they were looking in the refrigerator, or where they put the keys. All those things can be checked out. They are not necessarily a part of normal aging, and we have gotten exceedingly good at teasing apart what is part of normal aging and what is not, and what is puts you at the risk of the pathway of any dementia, including Alzheimer's.
But what if somebody said, "Well, that happens to me"? What you just described.
Yeah, I would tell you get checked out.
Really?
Yes. So my main goal is public education, and I've been very active.
So if I pick up the phone and I'm about to call somebody, and I forget who I'm going to call. If I'm about to go to I want to text somebody, and I go, and I want to text, and I forget who I'm going to text. I mean, that's not the same as going to the refrigerator and forgetting what you're looking for, and not knowing what's in the next room in your house. Those seems to be a little more severe to me.
They are, but they are an early indication that something is going on. And you're absolutely right. Stress can do that temporarily. There are many reversible causes of memory issues early on that are reversible and different from Alzheimer's. What I'm telling you is that unless you get checked out, you will not know. And now, for the first time in history, we have biological markers that are accurately assessing your increased risk to go down the Alzheimer's disease.
Tell me in the 2 minutes we have left, because I don't have enough time with you, exactly where we need to go and what we need to have checked out when we go.
So we need to scale this up so patients will be able to afford us. I spent 80% of my time fighting with the insurances and 20% treating people, which is backwards. So, but none of this is going to happen if we don't bring the government stakeholders together. So I would have the greatest appeal to President Trump, actually, to make eradicating of Alzheimer's disease in the next decade, let's say, which I believe is doable, as a cornerstone of his legacy, and get all the stakeholders involved, from Medicare and Dr. Oz to Mr. Kennedy at the HHS to the new Surgeon General, do a completely new and innovative way of educating the public and making people aware that this has now become what we call a serological disease. We're not going to just stick memory tests in front of you. We've got much more sophisticated ways of testing the blood, the spinal fluid, and very, very detailed imaging testing that determines who will have the disease or not. And let me just add this real quick. I firmly believe that 5 years from now, we will be testing 20, 30, 40-year-olds who are completely cognitively intact.
Not enough time with you. Not enough time with you, Dr. Leonni. I wish we had more time, but I'm just fascinated. So glad Dr. Carson recommended you. We're going to have you back, and I'm going to visit your clinic in Tucson, Arizona. I've got to come see you.
Oh, I am thrilled.
Thank you for joining me. Let me thank Dr. Sancho for joining me, the ambassador from Costa Rica. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we're out of time. I know you wish we had more, but we don't. Goodbye, everybody.